Jasmine wasn't running from a wedding. She was running from a sentence. Red Hollow woke beneath a sky the color of old copper, the wind dragging sand down the main street like it was trying to erase the town from the map. The wooden church bell rang slow and hollow, its sound rolling across the rooftops and into the open land beyond, where the prairie met the distant hills. To most folks, it was a wedding day. To Jasmine, it was the day her life was being traded. Torrin Campbell called it a deal. The town called it necessary. Jasmine knew it for what it was, payment. Her family's debts weren't written in neat lines of ink. They were carved into the land, into broken fences, into rifles leaned by doors at night. Land taken, cattle lost, promises made and never kept. And now, to settle it all, Torrin wanted her. They walked her down the red dirt road like she was already gone. Two men at her sides, not holding her, not touching her. Just close enough that she could feel the pressure of them, like invisible hands on her back. Her fingers clenched the soft edge of her deerskin dress, knuckles pale, the leather warm from her grip. Dust clung to her bare feet. Every step sent a small ache up her legs, a reminder that this road was real, and so was what waited at the end of it. People stood in doorways and beside hitching posts, pretending not to stare. Some looked at her with pity, some with curiosity, some with the quiet fear that followed Torrin Campbell everywhere he went. He didn't need love. He didn't need permission. He needed control. And what he wanted most wasn't Jasmine. It was the land her people had walked long before Red Hollow ever had a name. The church came into view, its pale wood bright against the dark line of the hills. The bell rang again. Then, like the world itself decided to blink, a supply wagon tipped in the middle of the street. Crates split open. Apples rolled across the dirt. A cloud of dust rose, thick and blinding. Voices shouted. Someone cursed. The men at Jasmine's sides turned their heads. That was all she needed. Jasmine ran. The wind tore at her hair as she broke free, her breath ripping from her chest in sharp, burning pulls. The ground was rough beneath her feet, small stones biting into her skin, but she didn't slow. Her heart thundered so loud she swore the whole town could hear it, a wild, desperate drum beating in her ears. "Stop her!" someone yelled. She cut down a narrow side street, past a leaning fence and a stack of empty barrels. The world narrowed to the sound of her own breathing and the slap of her feet against the dirt. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she wasn't going back. At the end of the alley, something waited. A black ranch wagon stood in the shadow of the church wall, tall and still, its dark wood drinking in the light. The horses were hitched and calm, their heads low, like they already knew how this would end. The wagon looked less like a vehicle and more like a creature resting, quiet, powerful, patient. Jasmine didn't think. She grabbed the back rail and hauled herself up, scrambling inside just as the sound of boots hit the alley behind her. She collapsed into the wooden floor, pulling the flap closed with shaking hands. The smell hit her first. Leather, gun oil, damp wool, the sharp metallic edge of old rain and cold steel. It didn't smell like safety. It smelled like someone who lived with danger and didn't bother pretending otherwise. "Bleeding on my floor won't improve your chances," a voice said. Jasmine froze. She lifted her head slowly. A man sat in the corner of the wagon, boots planted, shoulders broad beneath a weathered coat. A long, jagged scar ran across his face, pale against skin darkened by sun and wind. His eyes were steady, hard, the kind of eyes that didn't flinch when things went bad. They waited. For a second, neither of them spoke. Outside, footsteps pounded closer. A shadow crossed the canvas wall. Someone grabbed the side of the wagon, lantern light flickering through the cracks. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. The man with the scar leaned forward just enough for her to feel the weight of him shift. He pulled her down beside him, his coat falling over her shoulders, his arms settling around her like a barrier made of bone and iron. "Stay still," he murmured, low and firm. "Don't give them a reason." The lantern light paused outside. Jasmine pressed her face into the rough fabric of his coat, heart racing, the world holding its breath around her. Out here, everyone feared Graham, and tonight Jasmine was hiding inside his world. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask why she was running. He didn't ask for anything at all. He just looked at her the way men looked at the horizon when a storm was coming, calm, steady, already measuring the distance. The wagon rocked once as someone outside grabbed the side rail. Lantern light slid across the canvas, thin and yellow, like a blade testing for a weak spot. Jasmine could hear her own breathing, loud in her ears, ragged and uneven. She pressed closer to Graham's coat, the leather rough against her cheek, the smell of smoke and rain clinging to him like a second skin. The shadow of a face filled the narrow window. Torrin Campbell. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. The lantern in his hand cast sharp lines across his face, turning him into something carved from fire and bone. "Come on out, girl," he said, voice smooth and soft like a knife sliding into its sheath. "You don't have to make this hard. I'll be gentle." The words sank into Jasmine's chest, cold and heavy. Graham's arm tightened around her, just enough to let her know he was there. His hand came up, slow and deliberate, resting against the wagon wall. 2 quiet taps followed, steady and certain. The driver didn't hesitate. The horses leaned into their harnesses. The wagon lurched forward. Torrin stumbled back a step, boots scraping in the dirt as the wagon rolled past him. His face twisted, the soft smile cracking into something sharp and furious. He called out, but the sound was swallowed by the creak of wheels and the low snort of the horses. The trap had been sprung and missed. Inside the wagon, the world shifted. The town noise faded, replaced by the rhythm of the road. The steady roll of wood on dirt, the quiet jingle of metal, the deep, patient breathing of the man beside her. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't dare. Graham kept his arm around her until Red Hollow fell away behind them, until the lantern lights of the town became small and distant, until the land opened up into wide, empty stretches of dark and wind. Only then did he ease back. "You can breathe now," he said. She sucked in a long, shaking breath, like she'd been underwater and just broken the surface. Her hands were trembling, her fingers still curled in the edge of his coat like she might fall if she let go. She forced herself to look at him. Up close, the scar on his face was deeper than she'd thought. It cut across his cheek in a hard, uneven line, pale against weathered skin. His eyes were dark, watchful, carrying the kind of quiet that came from years of standing alone in open places. "You know who I am," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. He nodded once. "Everyone does." The wagon rolled on, the prairie stretching out on either side of them. The moon rose slow and wide, silvering the grass, turning the world into a sea of shadows and light. "Why help me?" Jasmine asked. "You didn't have to." Graham looked out through the narrow opening, eyes tracking the line of the land like he was reading a map only he could see. "I don't like men who hunt women through the streets," he said. "Never have." That was all. Silence settled between them, thick but not heavy. Jasmine could feel the road in her bones now, the steady pull of the wagon carrying her farther from the church, farther from Torrin, farther from the life that had been waiting to close around her like a noose. But the farther they went, the more a new question took shape in her mind. She had run from one danger. Had she run straight into another? The land grew rougher as they traveled. Fences gave way to open fields. Houses thinned out, then disappeared altogether. The air changed, cooler, cleaner, carrying the sharp scent of sage and damp earth. In the distance, a line of low hills rose against the sky, dark and solid. "Black Ridge," Graham said, following her gaze. "My land starts there." His land. The words settled into her chest, heavy with meaning. The wagon slowed as they passed through a wide wooden gate. A fence stretched out on either side, disappearing into the dark. A single lantern burned near a tall post, its light steady and sure, like a promise or a warning. The wagon rolled to a stop. Graham stood first, boots hitting the ground with a solid, grounded sound. He turned and offered his hand. Jasmine hesitated. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder, every choice feel heavier. The wind moved through the grass, whispering in a language she'd known all her life. She took his hand. As she stepped down from the wagon and onto the packed earth of Black Ridge Ranch, she felt it, the shift, the moment where one road ended and another began. Behind her, Red Hollow was just a memory. Ahead of her stood a man the whole frontier called a wolf, and she had no idea yet if she was standing beside her protector or the most dangerous thing she'd ever chosen to trust. Black Ridge Ranch wasn't a home, it was a fortress. The land opened up around it like a sea of grass and stone, the prairie rolling wide and restless beneath a sky that never seemed to settle. To the west, the mountains stood dark and watchful, their peaks cutting into the stars. Out here, the wind didn't ask permission. It took what it wanted, when it wanted. And every fence post, every lantern hook, every shadowed corner of the ranch carried the quiet promise of a rifle within reach. Jasmine felt it the moment she stepped through the gate. This place had been built to stand its ground. The yard was wide and hard-packed, marked with wagon tracks and hoof prints that crossed like scars in the dirt. A long, low barn sat off to one side, its doors reinforced with iron bands. The main house rose behind it, weathered wood and deep porches, the windows lit from within by a warm, steady glow that cut against the cold of the night. Graham moved through it all like he belonged to the land itself. He spoke to a couple of ranch hands in low, measured tones, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard, never far enough to invite questions. They glanced at Jasmine, curious but respectful, then went back to their work without a word. No one stared, no one whispered. It was a small thing, but it loosened something tight in her chest. Inside, the house smelled of coffee grounds and clean water, of wood smoke and worn leather. A woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp, knowing eyes met them in the hallway. She took one look at Jasmine's bandaged feet and dust-streaked dress, and her expression softened. "Come on, girl," she said gently. "Let's get you right." They led Jasmine down a narrow hall and into a small room at the back of the house. A tub had already been filled, steam curling up into the air. The water smelled faintly of sage and soap. Fresh clothes were folded on a chair, a simple cotton dress, soft and clean, nothing that pulled tight or weighed her down. Jasmine sank into the water with a quiet, shaky breath. The heat soaked into her bones, easing the ache in her legs, the sting in her feet. The woman, Mrs. Hale, she said her name was, washed the dust from her hair, careful around the small cuts on her hands. Jasmine closed her eyes and let herself be still. It had been a long time since she'd felt this kind of care without a price tied to it. When they wrapped her feet in fresh bandages and helped her into the clean dress, she barely recognized the girl in the small mirror. The wild edge in her eyes was still there, but the dust and fear had been washed away, replaced by something quieter, something steadier. They showed her to a room at the end of the hall. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fancy, but it was solid. A wide bed with a thick quilt, a small table by the window, a lantern hanging from a hook on the wall. Outside, the prairie stretched out, silvered by moonlight, endless and open. Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The ranch had its own sounds, the low shift of horses in the corral, the creak of wood as the house settled, the distant call of a night bird somewhere out in the dark. No shouting, no boots in the hallway, no voice calling her name. For the first time in years, the night passed without reaching for her. She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, someone was standing in the doorway. Graham. He didn't come in. He stayed where the light from the hall cut across the floor, like he didn't want to cross some invisible line. "You're safe here," he said. His voice was low, even. "The rest can wait until morning." Jasmine nodded, too tired to answer, her eyes already heavy again. He turned to go, then paused. "Get some rest," he added. "Tomorrow's soon enough for hard questions." The door closed softly behind him. Jasmine lay back against the pillow, staring at the dark beam of the ceiling. The quilt was warm. The room was quiet. Her body finally loosened, finally let go of the tight, constant readiness that had lived in her muscles for as long as she could remember. Sleep took her like a slow tide. But even as she drifted, the question stayed. Why had Graham's wagon been waiting so close to the church? Why had he been there at that exact moment when she had nowhere else to run? Outside, the wind moved through the grass, whispering across Black Ridge Ranch like it knew the answer. Torrin didn't lose his prey. He came to collect his property. The dust on the road rose long before the men appeared. Jasmine saw it from the porch, a pale ribbon stretching across the prairie, curling toward Black Ridge like a warning written in the air. The ranch hands noticed it too. Work slowed, voices dropped. One of them rested a hand on the stock of his rifle, not lifting it, just letting it be seen. The riders came into view a moment later. Torrin Campbell rode at the front, straight-backed in the saddle, his coat clean, his boots polished, like he'd stepped out of a parlor instead of a stretch of hard country. Two gunmen flanked him, their eyes moving constantly, measuring fences, doors, windows. Torrin's smile was already in place, smooth and bright, like steel wrapped in velvet. Graham stepped out of the house before they reached the gate. He didn't carry a rifle, He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, broad shoulders squared, boots planted in the dirt like he'd grown out of the ground itself. The wind tugged at his coat, at the ends of his hair, but he didn't move. The riders reined in at the fence. Torrin tipped his hat, polite as a preacher. "Morning, Graham. I'm here for my girl." The word "my" landed heavy in the air. Jasmine felt it from the porch, felt the old, familiar pull in her chest, the instinct to step back, to shrink, to disappear. For a heartbeat, she stayed where she was, half hidden by the doorframe, watching the two men face each other across the space between the fence and the house. Graham didn't smile. "She's not your girl," he said, "and she's not going anywhere with you." Torrin chuckled, a low, easy sound. "Now that's a shame. We had an agreement. Debts were settled. Land was promised. She's part of that." He leaned forward in the saddle, eyes sliding past Graham, searching the shadows of the porch. "Jasmine," he called, like he was coaxing a skittish horse. "Come on out. Let's not make a scene." Graham took a single step to the side. It was a small movement, but it blocked Torrin's view of the house completely. "She's here because she chose to be," Graham said, loud enough for the ranch hands, the gunmen, and the wind itself to hear. "You don't get to decide that anymore." Torrin's smile sharpened. "She never had a choice to begin with." The words cut clean and deep. Jasmine felt something in her snap. Before she realized she was moving, she stepped out onto the porch. The world seemed to hold its breath. Graham turned his head just enough to see her. His eyes flicked over her face like he was checking for fear, for doubt, for anything that might make him step in front of her again. She met his gaze and gave a small shake of her head. This one was hers. She walked down the porch steps, slow and steady, until she stood beside Graham. The ground felt solid under her feet. The sky felt wide over her head. Torrin's eyes locked onto her, and for the first time his confidence wavered. "You don't look like a runaway," he said lightly. "You look like a girl who's been confused." Jasmine lifted her chin. "You never asked me what I wanted," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You told me what I was worth. You told me who I belonged to." Torrin opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. "Today, I'm telling you something different," she went on. "I don't belong to you. I don't belong to your debts, your land, or your deals. I belong to myself." The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, at the edge of her dress. The ranch hands watched in silence. Even the horses shifted, uneasy. For a moment, Torrin just stared. Then he laughed. It wasn't the easy, smooth sound from before. It was sharp, brittle, like something cracking under pressure. "You think this ends here?" he said. "You think standing on his porch makes you free?" Graham moved then, not in front of her, but closer to her side. Not a shield, a presence. "This ends wherever you decide it ends," he said, "but it won't end with you taking her." Torrin's eyes slid to Graham, cold and calculating. He took in the rifles on the barn wall, the men standing behind the fence, the way the land itself seemed to lean toward the ranch. He tipped his hat again, slow and deliberate. "This isn't over," he said. "Storms don't stop just because the sky looks clear." He turned his horse, the gunmen following. Dust rose around them as they rode back the way they'd come, the sound of hooves fading into the wide, waiting land. Jasmine didn't move until they were gone. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. Graham looked at her, something like approval in his eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," she said quietly, "I did." Behind them, Black Ridge Ranch stood solid and still, a line drawn in the dirt. Out on the road, Torrin Campbell rode away with a promise of thunder in his gaze. And Jasmine knew, deep in her bones, that the calm they just claimed was only the space before the next strike of the storm. The truth was more dangerous than any gun. Black Ridge Ranch settled into a quiet that felt earned. The wind still moved across the fields, the horses still shifted in their pens, but after Torrin's visit, there was a fragile calm in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath. Jasmine tried to let herself believe it. She walked the fence line, helped in the kitchen, learned the rhythm of the ranch, the steady, grounded pulse of work that didn't ask who you were or where you came from, only whether you were willing to pull your weight. But the question wouldn't leave her. Why had Graham's wagon been waiting so close to the church? Late in the afternoon, with the sun low and the barn casting long shadows across the yard, she wandered inside the old storage shed at the far end of the property. It smelled of hay dust and oil, of wood that had soaked up years of weather and work. The place was quiet, forgotten, the kind of space people didn't look too closely at. That's why she did. Behind a stack of feed sacks and a broken plow, she found a small metal lockbox. It wasn't hidden well. It wasn't hidden at all, really. Just tucked away, like someone who wanted to forget it was there. Her hands hesitated on the latch. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside were papers, folded, yellowed at the edges, heavy with ink and weight. She recognized the markings first, the seal of the county office, then the names. Her family's. Her chest tightened as she pulled one free, then another. Land titles, debt contracts, notes of sale, and there, written clear and steady at the bottom of more than one page, was Graham's name. He hadn't just stepped in to help. He had bought the debt, all of it. The barn seemed to tilt around her. The wagon, the timing, the way he'd been waiting in the shadow of the church like he knew exactly which way she'd run. It wasn't chance. It was planning. Careful, patient, deliberate planning. Her hands curled around the papers until they crinkled. Footsteps sounded behind her. Graham stood in the doorway, the afternoon light cutting him in half, one side bright, the other lost in shadow. His eyes went from her face to the papers in her hands. He didn't pretend. "So," he said quietly, "you found them." Jasmine turned to face him. Her voice didn't shake. It broke. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you owned my family's life?" Graham stepped into the barn, slow, like he didn't want to startle a wounded animal. 3 years, he said. "Your father came to me when everyone else had already turned him away. The land sharks, the men Torrin works with, they would have taken everything. The house, the fields, maybe more than that. So you took it instead," she said. The words tasted bitter. "You just dressed it up like kindness." Graham stopped a few steps away. "I bought the debt as keep it out of Campbell's hands," he said. "I never meant to use it against you." "But you did," Jasmine shot back. "You parked that wagon where I couldn't miss it. You waited for me to run. You made sure I had nowhere else to go." The silence between them stretched thin and sharp. Graham didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He just nodded once like a man accepting a verdict. "I was wrong," he said, "about the way I did it, about thinking I could protect you by moving the pieces myself." Jasmine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Protect me," she repeated. "You held my chains and called it shelter." Graham's jaw tightened. He reached out, not for her, but for the papers. She let him take them. He walked past her, out of the barn, into the house. Jasmine followed, her heart pounding, the air feeling thick in her lungs. He stopped by the fireplace in the main room, the flames low but steady. He didn't hesitate. He dropped the stack of papers into the fire. The edges curled first, blackening. Then the inked names warped and disappeared. Lines of ink that had decided lives turned into smoke and ash. One by one, the contracts folded in on themselves, becoming nothing. "Look at me," Graham said. Jasmine did. "You don't owe me anything," he said. His voice was rough but steady. "Not land, not loyalty, not your life. I don't get to own you. I don't get to decide where you stand." The last of the papers collapsed into glowing embers. "If you want to leave tomorrow," he went on, "I'll help you. Money, supplies, a place to go. That's your choice. It always should have been." Ash drifted down onto the stone hearth. Chains turned to dust. Jasmine stared at the fire, at what was left of the past spread out in gray and black across the floor. Her anger was still there, hot and real, but beneath it, something else began to move. Something quieter, harder to name. "You should have told me," she said. "I know," Graham answered, "and I'm sorry." The word didn't fix anything. It didn't erase what he'd done, but it stood there between them, honest and exposed. Jasmine took a step back. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said. Graham nodded. "You don't have to know tonight." She turned toward the door, then paused. "But understand this," she added, looking back at him. "If I stay, it won't be because you burn those papers. It'll be because I choose this place. I choose this fight. I choose myself." Graham met her gaze, something like respect in his eyes. "That's the only way it means anything," he said. Jasmine stepped out into the evening light, the smell of smoke and open land in the air, the weight of the past finally lifting from her shoulders, even as the future, wide and uncertain, waited just beyond the fence line. No one saved anyone. They stood side by side. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a low, steady glow, the kind that didn't leap or roar, just waited. Outside, the prairie stretched into a dark, open quiet, the wind whispering through the grass like it carried old stories on its breath. The ash from the burned papers still clung to the stone, a thin gray line marking where the past had been turned into nothing. Jasmine stood near the doorway, her arms folded tight across her chest. The anger from the barn hadn't vanished. It had just settled, heavier now, deeper, like a stone dropped into still water. Graham poured coffee from a blackened pot, the steam rising slow and warm in the cool air. He didn't offer her a cup. He didn't try to fill the silence. He just waited. Finally, Jasmine spoke. "You said you don't like men who hunt women through the streets." Graham looked up. "I don't." "Why?" she asked. Not the easy answer, the real one. He set the pot down carefully, like it mattered where it landed. For a moment, he didn't speak at all. The lines in his face seemed to pull tight, the scar on his cheek standing out pale in the firelight. "There was a girl," he said at last, "years ago, before Black Ridge was more than a few fences and a half-built house." Jasmine stayed quiet. She wasn't Apache. She wasn't from town either. She lived out past the river with her father, ran a small freight stop, took in riders, wagon trains, anyone who needed a place to rest for the night. He paused, eyes drifting to the window, like he could still see the road out there. Torin wanted their land. It sat right on a new trade route. Jasmine felt her jaw tighten. He came with papers first, promises, smiles. When they said no, he came with threats. Graham's hand lifted, fingers brushing the scar without really touching it. "I stepped in, thought I could scare him off. Thought a man with a ranch and a few guns could stand up to a man with money and reach." His mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Turns out, money and reach go a long way." He leaned back against the table. "Torin hired men. They caught me on the road one night. Didn't try to kill me, just wanted to leave a message." His voice stayed even, but something rough moved underneath it. This was the message. Jasmine looked at the scar again, seeing it not as a mark of toughness, but as a line drawn by someone who wanted to make sure Graham remembered his place. "What happened to the girl?" Jasmine asked. Graham's eyes darkened. "She married him, not because she wanted to, because he told her he'd take everything else if she didn't. Her father's land, his wagons, his life." He swallowed. "She didn't last a year." The fire popped softly. "I told myself if I'd been stronger, faster, smarter." He stopped, shaking his head. "Truth is, I was just another man who thought wanting to help was the same as being able to." Jasmine stepped closer without thinking. "That's why you hate him," she said. "That's why I don't stop watching him," Graham corrected. "That's why I started keeping records. Names, deals, land grabs. Every crooked move he's made across this territory." He met her eyes. "And that's why I didn't walk away when I saw you running." Jasmine felt the weight of it settle between them. Not just his anger, his guilt, the long years of carrying a failure he couldn't fix. "You still use me," she said quietly. Graham didn't flinch. "I did." Silence stretched again, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was careful. Jasmine looked out the window at the open land, at the dark line of the fence cutting across the grass. "Where I come from," she said, "we don't believe in debts the way you do. We believe in balance. If something is taken, something has to be given back." Graham watched her, listening. "You took my past," she went on. "You burned it in that fire. Now you're standing here with a future you don't know how to fix." She turned to face him fully. "If you want to go after Torin, don't ask me to hide behind you. Don't ask me to wait in this house and hope you come back." Graham straightened. "I won't," he said. "I won't stand behind you," Jasmine continued. "I'll stand beside you." The words landed solid and sure between them. Graham studied her for a long moment, like he was seeing her for the first time. Not as the girl who ran into his wagon, not as the debt he burned in the fire, but as something steady and unmovable. He held out his hand. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't grand. Just a simple, open gesture. Palm rough and scarred, fingers steady. Jasmine looked at it. This wasn't a vow. This wasn't a promise made to the wind. It was a choice. She took his hand. Their grip was firm, equal, the kind of handshake you gave someone you trusted to stand their ground when things went bad. "Partners," Graham said. "Partners," Jasmine answered. Outside, the wind picked up, running across the prairie in a low, restless wave. The night didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something waiting. Two people stood in the light of a dying fire, not saved, not owned, not hiding, just ready. And somewhere beyond the fences of Black Ridge Ranch, Torin Campbell was still moving across the land, unaware that the girl he'd once tried to claim and the man he'd once tried to break had chosen, together, to stop running. Every pair of eyes was a verdict. The fall fair spread across Red Hollow like a second town laid over the first. Strings of oil lamps swinging between posts, their soft yellow light turning dust into gold and faces into masks. Wagons lined the road. Horses stamped and snorted in their tethers. Somewhere near the center, a fiddler pulled a thin, bright tune out of his strings, and the sound floated over the crowd like a nervous laugh. People had come from miles around. Ranchers, traders, families in clean shirts and worn boots, men with money in their pockets and men with nothing but pride. It was the one night of the year when everyone stood in the same place and pretended they were equal. Graham and Jasmine walked in together. The talking didn't stop. It shifted. Heads turned. Conversations bent around them like water around a rock. Some folks nodded at Graham, respectful, cautious. Others stared at Jasmine, trying to decide which story fit her best. Runaway, victim, or something more dangerous. Jasmine felt it all. Every look like a hand reaching out to touch a part of her life they didn't own. She kept her chin up, her steps steady. Graham stayed close, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. Torrin Campbell waited near the long tables where cider and whiskey were being poured. He looked like he belonged there. Clean coat, easy smile, a hand resting on the back of a chair like the place had been built for him. When he saw them, that smile widened, slow and confident, like he'd been expecting this moment all night. "Evening," he called, his voice carrying just far enough to pull attention. "Didn't think you'd show, Graham." "We don't scare easy," Graham said. Torrin's eyes slid to Jasmine. "I was talking to some folks," he went on lightly, telling them an interesting story about debts and land and how some people use both to keep others where they want them. A ripple moved through the crowd. Jasmine could feel it, the way curiosity sharpened into something colder. People leaned in, ears tilted toward Torrin's smooth, steady voice. "Funny thing about papers," Torrin said. "They don't care about good intentions. They care about signatures. And last I checked, Graham here had plenty of those tied to this young woman's family." A man near the cider barrel frowned. Someone else crossed their arms. "Law's the law," a voice muttered. "Debt's debt," another answered. Graham took a step forward, but Jasmine moved first. She walked into the open space between Torrin and the crowd, the oil lamps throwing light across her face, catching in her eyes. "If I was being forced," she said clear and steady, "I wouldn't be standing here." The fair quieted. "I wouldn't be walking into the middle of this town. I wouldn't be looking any of you in the eye." She turned slowly, meeting their gazes one by one. "I'm here because I chose to be. I'm here because I want to be." Torrin clapped once, soft and mocking. "That's a pretty speech," he said. "Choice sounds real nice when you don't have to pay for it." Jasmine faced him. "You never gave me a choice," she said. "You gave me a price." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone near the fence shifted their weight. A woman near the bake table looked away. Torrin's smile thinned. He raised his hand slightly, like he was about to make one last generous offer. That's when the smell hit. Smoke, thin at first, just a hint of it, slipping into the warm air of the fair. Then thicker, darker. It rolled in from the far side of the lot, from the direction of the horse pens and the storage sheds. Someone coughed. A horse screamed. "Fire!" a voice shouted. The night broke open. People surged, stumbling over benches, knocking into tables. The fiddler's tune cut off in a sharp, ugly note. Oil lamps swayed, some tipping, spilling light and shadow across the ground. Graham grabbed for Jasmine's hand, but the crowd moved like a wave, and the space between them filled in an instant. Jasmine was pushed back, then sideways, then spun around as bodies pressed in from every direction. The smoke thickened, burning her eyes, tearing at her throat. "Graham!" she called. A hand closed around her arm. Not Graham's. It yanked her hard, pulling her out of the press of people and toward the dark edge of the fair. She twisted, trying to break free, her heart slamming against her ribs. Through the smoke, she caught a glimpse of Torrin's face, not smiling, watching. The figure dragging her moved fast, head down, shoulder set. They shoved past a line of wagons, into the space between the last oil lamps and the open dark of the fields. Jasmine dug her heels in, kicked back, felt her foot connect with something solid. The grip on her arm faltered for half a second, long enough for her to wrench free. She ran. The fair was behind her now, a blur of light and noise and shouting. Ahead, the land opened into shadow and smoke, wide and waiting. Somewhere in that chaos, Graham was fighting his way toward where she'd been standing. Somewhere behind her, someone else was still moving, still hunting. Jasmine didn't look back. She disappeared into the dark, the oil lamps of Red Hollow flickering like distant stars as the night closed in around her, and the storm Torrin had promised finally broke. No one was coming to save her. Only herself. The smoke thinned as Jasmine burst past the last line of wagons, the fair's oil lamps fading behind her like a dying constellation. The air ahead was colder, sharper, filled with the raw smell of hay and horse sweat. She didn't slow. She couldn't. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but the ground kept moving under her feet and she kept moving with it. A hand grabbed her again, hard, brutal, fingers digging into her sleeve. She twisted, slipped, and felt herself yanked sideways through the open doors of a stable. Dark swallowed her. The stable was a rush of shadows and noise. Horses stamped and snorted, whites of their eyes flashing as she stumbled past them. The man behind her cursed, boots thudding on the packed dirt. Jasmine darted between stalls, knocking over a bucket, the clang of metal ringing out like a bell in her ears. A wooden staircase rose at the far end of the barn, narrow and steep. She took it 2 steps at a time. The boards creaked and groaned under her weight, the sound loud enough to feel like a signal flare. At the top, a low door led out onto the roof. She shoved it open. Wind hit her like a wall. The night was wide and wild up there. The sky stretched open, the fair's lights a distant glow to one side and the dark prairie rolling out on the other. The roof sloped away beneath her feet, old boards slick with dust and dew. She took 1 step, then another. Her foot slid. She dropped to her hands, skin scraping against rough wood, a sharp cry tearing out of her before she could stop it. The man behind her burst through the door, his silhouette cutting across the starlight. Jasmine scrambled up and ran. The roof dipped and rose like a frozen wave. Nails stuck out in places, bent and rusty, catching at the hem of her dress. Fabric tore with a sharp rip. The wind tore at her hair, at her breath, at her balance. She reached the edge and didn't stop. She jumped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then she hit the fence. Her body slammed into the top rail, knocking the air from her lungs. She tumbled over it and hit the ground hard, rolling, dirt and grass in her mouth, stars bursting behind her eyes. She didn't stay down. She pushed up on shaking arms and ran again, legs unsteady but moving, carrying her across open ground toward the shadowed line of trees and sheds beyond. Behind her, lantern light flared. A gunshot cracked the air, not at her but above her, a warning that split the night open like thunder. The sound chased her forward, spurred her on, drove her feet faster than her fear ever could. Jasmine! Graham's voice cut through the dark. It came from ahead, from the far side of the yard, from a patch of light where the ranch house stood tall and solid against the night. She turned toward it, heart slamming, vision narrowing to that one steady glow. The ground dipped. She stumbled, caught herself, kept going. Her lungs burned like fire. Her legs felt like they were filled with sand instead of muscle. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by a shout. She didn't look back. She ran for the light. The yard opened up, the house looming larger with every step. Figures moved at the edge of her vision. Ranch hands, shadows, men running, someone shouting her name again. She crossed the last stretch of open ground and nearly collapsed as strong hands caught her, pulling her in hard against a solid chest. Graham. He wrapped his coat around her, turning her so his back faced the dark behind them. She could feel his heart beating, fast and real, under the rough fabric. "You're safe," he said, breathless. "You're safe." Jasmine clutched his coat, her fingers shaking, her whole body still running even though her feet had stopped. Behind them, the night was alive with movement. Men calling out, horses snorting, lanterns swinging through the dark as the ranch hands spread out, searching. But for a moment, in the circle of light from the house, it was just the two of them. Jasmine leaned into him, not because she needed to be held, but because she had made it. She had run across roofs and fences and fear itself, and she was still standing. Graham looked down at her, something fierce and proud in his eyes. "You didn't wait for anyone," he said. She shook her head, a tired, breathless smile breaking through. "No," she answered, "I didn't." The strongest man in the room was the one everyone could finally see. Morning came slow over Red Hollow, pale light washing the dust and smoke from the night before into something almost clean. The fairgrounds were quiet now. Tables overturned, lanterns hanging crooked. The last of the embers from the small fire near the horse pens smoldering under a watchful eye. People gathered anyway. Word had spread faster than the wind ever could. Something was about to happen. Jasmine stood beside Graham near the center of town, the hard-packed dirt cool beneath her bare feet. She felt the eyes on her again, but they were different this time. Not judging, not measuring, waiting. A wagon rolled in from the east road, its wheels creaking under the weight of men and paper. Two deputies rode ahead, their badges catching the light. Behind them came the county marshal, a tall, gray-bearded man with a face like carved stone and a reputation for not being bought. Torrin Campbell was brought in last. His hands were bound in front of him, iron cuffs catching the sun. The clean coat was gone, replaced by dust and sweat. The easy smile had vanished too, leaving something small and tight behind his eyes. He still walked like he owned the street, but the sound of the chains at his wrist told a different story. The crowd parted as he was led forward. Graham stepped out. He didn't carry a rifle. He carried a satchel. He set it down on the rough wooden table that had been dragged into the center of the square. The leather strap creaked as he opened it, and the first stack of papers came out like a deck of cards dealt slow and careful. "Land claims," he said, his voice steady and clear. "Filed under false names, signed by men who were paid to look the other way." He laid them out. "Bills of sale for property that never changed hands," he went on, because the owners were forced off before they could fight back. Another stack hit the table. The murmur in the crowd grew. "Receipts for payments made to deputies and clerks," Graham said, "to make complaints disappear, to make charges vanish, to make people forget." The marshal leaned in, eyes narrowing as he scanned the documents. Torrin laughed sharp and loud. "That's a lot of paper, Graham. Doesn't make it true." Graham didn't look at him. "Labor contracts," he continued, "signed by men and women who thought they were taking jobs on ranches and freight lines." He lifted one page higher so the crowd could see the fine print. They were sold instead, moved across territory lines, kept under guard. Some of them were children. The word fell heavy. The fairground went still. The marshal straightened. "Is that so?" Graham nodded once. "I've got statements, names, places, times." He glanced at Jasmine just for a moment, then back to the marshal. "I've been keeping track for 5 years. Torrin's face went red. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" he snapped. "You think standing there with your little pile of papers makes you clean?" Graham finally turned. "I don't think I'm clean," he said. "I think I waited too long." The marshal reached for the papers. One by one, he flipped through them, his jaw set harder with each page. The deputies shifted, hands moving closer to their belts. Torrin took a step back. "Now, hold on," he said, the confidence draining out of his voice. "We can talk about this. There are people who'll vouch for me. Men in offices, men with influence." The marshal looked up. "Then they can vouch for you in court." He nodded to the deputies. They moved in. Torrin twisted, tried to pull away, but the iron at his wrists held fast. The crowd pressed closer, drawn in by the sound of chains and the sight of a man who had always walked through town like he owned it, being brought low in the open light of day. "This isn't over," Torrin shouted, his voice cracking. "You hear me? I'll be back." No one answered. The deputies led him past the table, past the lantern posts, past the line where the dirt road turned into open land. His boots kicked up dust as he went, but it didn't follow him this time. It settled back into the ground, like the town itself was finally exhaling. Jasmine watched him go. She didn't feel victory. She didn't feel joy. She felt light, like something heavy had been lifted off her shoulders. Something she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying until it was gone. Graham stepped back to her side. "It's done," he said. Jasmine shook her head slowly. "It started." He studied her, then nodded. "Yeah, it is." The marshal packed up the papers, the deputies mounted their horses, and the crowd began to break apart, voices rising into something like normal again. The town would talk about this day for years, about the man who fell, about the girl who stood. Jasmine turned away from the square and looked toward the open land beyond the last row of buildings. The prairie stretched out, wide and patient, waiting the way it always did. Behind her, Torrin Campbell was being driven down a road that didn't lead back. Ahead of her, there was nothing but space. And for the first time, the space didn't feel empty. It felt like possibility. Freedom wasn't about where you went. It was about where you stayed, because you wanted to. Morning came quiet over the prairie. The kind of quiet that didn't press in on you, but opened up instead. The sky stretched wide and pale, brushed with soft gold where the sun climbed slow behind the distant hills. Wind moved through the tall grass in long, gentle waves, carrying the clean scent of earth and dew. Jasmine stood at the edge of the fence line, watching the land wake up. The red dirt road cut a thin, familiar line across the fields. She remembered it the way you remembered a scar, how it had burned under her feet the night she ran, how it had carried her away from fear and straight into the unknown. Beyond it, the mountains rested dark and steady, their shapes softened by the morning light. Graham approached without sound, boots quiet in the grass. He didn't speak right away. He stood beside her, facing the same horizon, like this was something you did together. Watch the day begin, measure what it might hold. After a moment, he reached into the pocket of his coat. The ring caught the light when he opened his hand. It was simple, heavy, worn smooth at the edges. A wolf's head was carved into the metal, its lines clean and sure, the mark of Black Ridge Ranch, the kind of ring you didn't wear for show, the kind you wore because it meant something. Graham held it out, palm open. "This isn't to keep you here," he said. His voice was low, steady, honest. "It's just to ask if you want to stay." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She looked out over the land again, the fields where the grass bent and rose with the wind, the fence post that marked a place you could stand your ground, the road that led back to a town that had once decided who she was worth and what she belonged to. She thought about the night she'd run, heart in her throat, feet bleeding, not knowing if she was chasing freedom or just a different kind of cage. She thought about the barn, the fire, the ashes on the stone. She thought about standing in the middle of the fair, smoke in the air, and hearing her own voice say, "I choose." Graham waited. He didn't step closer. He didn't press. His hand stayed where it was, open and still, like the land itself offering, not demanding. Jasmine turned back to him. She saw the scar on his face, the one he carried not as a badge, but as a reminder. She saw the man who had burned his own power in a fire because he refused to hold it over her. She saw the partner who had run toward the chaos when everyone else ran away. Slowly, she reached out. Her fingers brushed the cool metal of the ring. She lifted it, felt its weight settle into her palm, solid and real. "This time," she said, her voice soft but sure, "I'm not running." She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit like it had been waiting there all along. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, at the edge of Graham's coat, sweeping across the prairie in a wide, restless breath. The grass leaned with it, the land answering in a language older than fences and roads and deals. Graham let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't take her hand. He didn't pull her closer. He just stood there with her, two people, side by side. Not a rescuer and the rescued, not an owner and the owned. Just two souls who had walked through fire and smoke and open ground and chosen the same place to stop. Jasmine looked at the ring again, the wolf's head catching the light of the rising sun. She smiled, not wide, not loud, but real. Behind them, Black Ridge Ranch stirred to life. A door opened, a horse snorted. Somewhere, a kettle began to boil. Ahead of them, the prairie rolled on, endless and waiting, not as an escape, but as a home. Jasmine took a step forward, not away. Graham matched her stride, and together they walked into the day. Not because they had nowhere else to go, but because they had found a place worth staying. The land they stood on didn't belong to either of them. They belonged to it, and for the first time, that felt like freedom.